Sure. I really enjoyed this film. I've been a comic fan, since I was a little kid, and discovered them on the newsstands. They're not really on the newsstands anymore these days, but when I was a kid, they still were. Over the past 10 years or so, I've been really interested in comic history and how trends in comic publishing and storylines reflect social or political issues that are going on in the United States. And one of the things that really struck me about this film is I had no idea that the women's movement was so instrumental in restoring Wonder Woman to her former self, to bringing back that mythology. In comics, they talk a lot about World War II and the birth of the superheroes and Captain America punching Hitler, and they talk about Frederick Wertham in the congressional hearings in the 50s. But no one talks about the women's movement being instrumental in restoring Wonder Woman's mythology. That's hidden history for comics, and I've read so much about it, and I really enjoyed the film because I'm discovering part of comics that no one within the industry is really talking about these days.
I also really enjoyed the film, and they brought up so many great points about the way that women and girls are portrayed in the media. And I think one of the most important points that they were making was the value of imaginary role models and how that helps us to think about what we're capable of and what the opportunities are that are available to us. And a lot of the work that we do at Vermont Works for Women is around helping middle school and high school girls think more broadly about the career options that they have. And the #1 recruitment tool for getting girls into programs and careers where women are underrepresented is exposure to these non-traditional role models, to women who are doing these jobs. And so I really loved when Shelby Knox said that we need to have these imaginary heroes so girls can think of themselves as those real life heroes. So girls can think of themselves as the president and the engineer and these things where we don't see women all the time. And so I think there's real value in having that imaginary role model. And I think the way that they were talking about the very limited portrayal of women in the media having to do with only 3% of the decision-making positions within the media industry being held by women, and how we can change that, and that it's about having girls and women make their own media. I think that's an area where we can really change that. And we see, over the past 10 years, there have been no change in the number of women who are in engineering. But so there's going to be, it's going to take time to have that change happen out in the real world. But in the media, we can change it immediately. We can have more women in positions of power right away. And so I think that's something that we need to see, and we'll see when we have more women media makers. Another piece that I think was important was having so few images of powerful women in the media that we're kind of grasping at whatever we get, and the idea of sexualization as empowerment. And that's one piece, that's one avenue for empowerment for anybody, but it's a very limiting and very limited view of how women can be powerful. And so I want to see more portrayals of women where they have, where there's value on more than just their youth and their beauty and their sexuality. And I liked, I think it was the woman who was a part of the Riot Girls, one of the bands there was talking about how there's this veneer of change without it being actual change, and it's this veneer of power without actual power. And so how do we see that change actually coming up and see real change, real value, real power in these ways that women are portrayed in the media. And towards the end there, we also hear Gloria Steinem talking about Wonder Woman representing community, she's representing justice, she's representing compassion and friendship among women. And that's something that we're also really lacking in the portrayal of women and girls in the media is powerful and productive and helpful and healthy relationships between women. We see women as adversaries. We see them literally ripping each other's hair out on all these different reality TV shows, and that isn't helping anybody. And so how can we start to see more positive female relationships portrayed in the media? And I think that's going to be, we also this is all learned behavior. And so girls are seeing this and they're thinking, oh, well, I'm supposed to be competitive with other girls and women aren't supposed to like each other. And then we also see lots of an increased amount of bullying and cyberbullying and relational aggression among girls. And it's chalked up to like, oh, this is just a part of growing up and everybody has to deal with it. But how can we start to portray that as different so that we can teach girls that it doesn't have to be that way? And so I liked that they kind of touched on all these really important different pieces in the film. And I'm curious to know what resonated with the audience members and what did you like about the film or what did you pull out of it that was relevant to you?
For me, it's really a shock that it's 2013. And this shit has been going on for so long. Mm-hmm. It's been going on, 68 years old now, and it's been there since I was a child. And it really is true what that woman spoke of, and then you repeated. The veneer is so slick that women, I don't know, there's this myth out there that there's a whole lot of power going on. And something that I wanted to bring up that to me is a real veneer is that now women are being allowed by men to go to combat to mimic what men have been doing for thousands of years and pick up a gun and kill somebody. And that's supposed to be equality. Equality of what? Violence? Well, that's so weird. It's as though women are being thrown into this real violent men's world and saying, now you're equal, honey, but when you come home, you're still not going to get paid equal pay. This is disgusting. The veneer is slick. A lot of money and attention giving into this facade.
Yeah, you make a really good point. We have to remember that this is really intentional. Like, there's a lot of money. The media is they're portraying the messages that they want to get across, and they're doing it with really smart people, with a lot of money, and with a lot of attention and effort to do that. It's interesting to talk about kind of how the propaganda of all of it, how women were first, you also see other fictional characters like Rosie the Riveter, who was meant to get women into the workforce. And then there was a very strong propaganda movement to get women back out of the workforce, and now it's all about femininity and being, taking care of the family and taking care of the husband, and how powerful and slick of a tool the media can be. So you make a really good point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you raise a great point about there being this appearance of progress without any actual progress. And just speaking from the comics field, things really haven't changed since Gloria Steinem got that call in the 70s from DC Comics saying, are you happy now? Right now, I think less than 10% of comic professionals working for Marvel or DC Comics are women. It's mostly still a guys-driven field. The few titles out there starring women superheroes, and obviously Wonder Woman is still being published, but for the most part, the rest of them are all variations on a male superhero. You have Superman, so they'll publish a Supergirl comic. There's a Batwoman, there's Batgirl. And these are the only female-fronted superhero titles out there. So again, it's the woman being defined by her connection to a man. There's also this trend in comics, and it goes to the sexualization that we were talking about. It's called the broke back pose. And we saw it in a few of the newer covers. It's where you have a female superhero on the cover, and she's angled in a way so you can both see her butt and her breasts at the same time. And it'd be impossible because she'd have a broke back in order to make that angle. And I guarantee you pick up a superhero comic with a woman on the cover, and she's going to be making that pose or something very similar. And another thing that this reminded me of is, does anyone here know Alison Bechdel, the cartoonist? She lives up in Chittenden County. Yeah, I love her stuff. She did this comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For. She's had a couple of graphic novels. She's amazing. She maybe about 10 years ago, she put out this challenge out there called the Bechdel test. And are you familiar with this? And so pick any book or movie or comic and look for a scene that features two women having a conversation about something other than men. It's really damn hard. There's a website where every new comic comes out, they'll judge it to see if it passes the Bechdel test. It's a small portion. And so it's shocking that, you know, in comics, that it's so rare to have two women in one scene together talking about something other than Superman or Batman and their relationship to them. And so there hasn't been much progress. For my own publications, you know, we've tried, I think we're pretty lucky. There's a lot of great female cartoonists in New England, which is kind of my comic community. Most of our publications are probably you know, 30 to 40% female contributors. Which is a lot better than the mainstream comics. I kind of, interestingly, a couple years ago, I helped publish an erotic graphic novel anthology, and that actually had more women contributors than men. But so I'm always trying to keep an eye on trying to be inclusive within our community and encourage more women to draw comics, and for people to publish women drawing comics.
I'm glad you brought up the Bechdel test. I was thinking about that as I was coming over here today. I find the Bechdel test to be so depressing. It's such a low standard. Yeah. It's such a low standard, and how many, is it films and TV shows and comics aren't even meeting that really, really, really low standard. And when you talk about the Brokeback position and how you often see women in this crazy position, just recently, I don't know if you saw it, there was a poster of all these male superheroes put in that position, yes, and how absurd it looks. And it's, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that's crazy. And it takes us switching the genders of the people in that position to be like, why are women portrayed in this way all the time? This is not something where you're not in a position where you're going to, you know, take action and you're going to be in charge of a situation or feel in control. They're sexualizing vulnerability and they're sexualizing violence against women. And so these things are really problematic, and they're so pervasive, and we see them all the time that we're not questioning them, and we're seeing this as normal. And it takes seeing the Hulk in this position to be like, what is going on here?
So I'm a high school student, and I'm kind of in the middle of all of this like influence, and I am seeing women getting, you know, being able to work in combat and maybe, you know, going up to the level of men. But I'm not really seeing women like getting their own rights in something that maybe isn't a male thing. There's not anything that they're jumping up and being the first in. And I was wondering if you could talk about what the feminist movement is like right now and what's going on. Because the film kind of stopped really in the early 2000s and kind of just left us a little bit questioning, at least I was questioning, what's going on right now.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I noticed that them stopping kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s as well. I think the feminist movement right now is going in any number of different directions. We still have an issue of equal pay, where women are not making the same amount of money for the same work that men are. In 2013, still a problem, and still a problem in Vermont, even though Vermont does better than the national average. There is a portion of the feminist movement right now that's talking about childcare and affordable childcare. What's interesting is that during World War II, when we had Rosie the Riveter, childcare was subsidized by the national government, and so we had childcare paid for because we needed women in the workforce, and now we need women in the workforce, and we're not doing that. And so that's another area where we're seeing that. And those two areas seem to be ones where a lot of emphasis is, but it's also around media portrayal of women, and it can kind of go in any number of different directions. But that's where, like, those are three areas where we're seeing a lot of emphasis right now.
It's interesting. What's been really frustrating for me over the years is how the idea of feminism has been marketed and changed and turned women against the idea. You know, I remember in high school, you know, talking to some friends about this, and I had a female friend say, "Oh, I'm not a feminazi," which I think is just one of the worst phrases in the world, equating equal rights to the horror of genocide. And that, I think, has gotten worse over the years, as I think we maybe move further and further from the real political action of the 60s and 70s. You know, just a few weeks ago, there's a lot of fear over Yahoo's new CEO. They just appointed a woman CEO, and she gave an interview where she said she's not a feminist, and she doesn't believe the feminist movement helped her career in any way. And there's a lot of people saying, "Are you kidding me? You know, you probably wouldn't be where you are if it wasn't for the work that was done decades prior." And I think that's an example of some women not recognizing the good work that's happened in the past, and also the work that still needs to be done. Right now, there is an equal pay bill at the State House here in Montpelier. A lot of people don't know about it. You know, Vermont has some pretty good equal pay laws, but they're a few decades old, so we're improving the law and making it more clear and putting in more protections. And it's a tough slog up there. I mean, I think it's going to pass, but it's been very tough. And this is a legislature that's 50% female. So, you know, again, progress of change, but no real change. Appearance of change, but no real change.
It's terrible. One of the interesting things in that film that was just alluded to, but was a fairly powerful process back in the early second wave in the 70s, late 60s, 70s, was the whole notion of unpaid labor. Yes, there's equal pay, but there's so much which functions really as a gift economy by way of work that happens in the home or in terms of care. So there was a big move, which I strongly urge everybody to continue these days, is when you donate labor, to specifically say, I am donating labor, so that the economy of what's taking place gets articulated and recognized. And that would be a very interesting thing to see if, in fact, the unpaid labor, which often sits not just in this country but around the world, in the location of women's work or pink-collar work even, was clearly identified and talked about in terms of dollars. The other thing is that there were some of the things that took place in the olden days really talked about communities of connection where all kinds of ideas were unfrozen and unpacked. The notion of intimacy, I was talking with a colleague who's half my age, and we had a fascinating conversation about how intimacy really was not sexualized. It was unfrozen in terms of sexuality, and it was a fascinating thing to understand that you could have connections of extraordinary depth and power that did not have to be sexualized, though they could be. And that, I think, there are a lot of areas that are subtly still in place. I have another colleague who's a lovely, lovely fellow, and he said, well, you know, in my generation, we really don't have issues around sexual orientation or transgender or feminism or any of that. And when we were talking at one point, he started to giggle, and we were teasing him about his laugh. And he said, oh, did I sound like a girl? And right in that moment, you thought, oh, change, but not so very much. That still would have been a deeply negative thing for him to think that his chuckle sounded girlish. So, oh, that's my little rant.
When you talk about claiming these work hours, these volunteer hours, with whom would you claim them? How would you make that?
Well, because I was deeply involved in a lot of, in those days, media, and I would be doing graphics for all kinds of organizations, community-based organizations. Down the bottom, you would just say, you'd have your little byline, you'd put labor donated. But then we would also do it, it would be named if you were in social settings. So it was pretty much in that fashion, kind of old world.
For
I'd
me,
love to see it on Twitter.
One of the disturbing things that this film really picked up on is a trend in comics, and I think this is in other forms of literature and movies as well, is the death or sacrifice of a woman as the motivation for a male action hero. You see that throughout comics. You see that in films and books as well, but it's really prevalent in comics. When they talked to Gail Simone at the end, she was the first female writer of Wonder Woman in 66 years. They didn't mention this, but actually Gail Simone kind of got found by DC Comics because she started a blog at one point before she was a professional comic writer called Women in Refrigerators. which chronicled all these crazy deaths of female superheroes. And that one actually refers to when, they showed it briefly, when Green Lantern comes home and I think his girlfriend's been chopped up and stuffed in the refrigerator. So she started out being critical of this empire of DC Comics and has found her way. And she no longer writes Wonder Woman, but she did it for about 3 or 4 years. She's writing Batgirl now for DC Comics. So I mean, there is a little bit of progress, but again, she's I think the only female writer for DC Comics right now, and she's writing 1 or 2 books. And their big writers write 3 or 4 books, and they're writing, you know, the big icons, Superman and Batman. So I thought that was really interesting. And actually, one of the books DC is publishing right now, it's called Superman Unlimited or something like that. It's a digital-only comic, which is the new trend. The plot of this comic is actually that Superman gets tricked into accidentally killing Lois Lane, and then goes crazy and starts fighting all the other superheroes. Like, that's the plot of the story. And it's insulting to women, but I think it's also insulting to the idea of Superman. And to men as well, that we need, you know, your death as a motivation in life. The whole thing's rotten.
You know, it strikes me as odd that we have, here we are in 2013, and we still have superhero women that are very scantily clad.
Yeah.
And the film touched on that just a little bit. I was surprised that it took that long into the film to touch on it. And the other thing is that we have these grown women. They're obviously physically grown because they're showing their best assets. We're still calling them girls.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. A couple years ago, Marvel Comics, in an attempt to get more female readership, they started a line. They called it Girl Comics. You know, and it's like they just don't get it. They just don't get it.
But you know, a lot of women don't get it either. They refer to themselves as girls.
Yep.
People in my mother's generation, and even some people in my generation, you know. Yeah, got girls' night out. And
Yep. Yep.
There's a lot of sexism deeply ingrained in our language, in the way that we talk about women, the way that women talk about themselves, lots of these different things. And it happens so often that we're not noticing it. And so I think the first step in changing any of that is calling attention to it. And so pointing out to your coworker when they say, oh, did I laugh like a girl? Why would that have been a problem? You know, and what we're talking about is microaggressions, so not these major things where we're seeing overt sexism necessarily all the time, but things that are so deeply ingrained that we're not necessarily noticing them, and they're still, you know, affecting putting these negative images on people. Yep.
But what about this popular behavior of referring to women as guys? Oh, hi, how are you guys?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the wait staff in the restaurant.
Yeah.
What can I do for you guys? And
Yeah.
I just find it so offensive.
Yeah.
You know, I'm 74. It's a long time to come into my feminist being, you know, and a lot of work. And I've been very active and still am. And just don't understand, you know, when I say to someone, please don't refer to me as a guy, and especially the younger women, 20, 30, 40 somethings would look at me, you know, askance, to say, well, what's the matter with me? You know, but they seem to eat it up, this expression of you guys. They seem to be proud of it. And like, where's that coming from?
Well, that is the hardest one to kind of banish from your language because we use it so frequently. In one of our programs, Rosie's Girls, it's a summer program for middle school girls, and we have an activity that we call retooling our language, where we call attention to all the ways where we're using gender-specific language when gender-neutral language is really more appropriate. So instead of male man, it's male carrier, or police officer versus policeman. And we inevitably, the subject of hey guys comes up. And it's the hardest one for people to change because they don't realize that they're doing it. But it's, again, calling attention to the fact that we're doing it and coming up with alternatives that's going to help us to make that change. And I think the way that we correct other people, if we are interacting with someone, say, at a restaurant, it needs to be, it has to be an important way of how we, you know, address this or how we redirect somebody, because we don't want, nobody wants to think of themselves as doing something bad, or I'm a bad person, or I'm a sexist person, or I'm a racist person, or all these different things. And so how can we frame the conversation as to something that you're saying and not something that you are? And so just wanting to be, coming up with creative ways of saying, you know, when you say that, it makes me feel this way, you know, instead of, that is problematic. And then I'm not suggesting how you said it was wrong, but we have to think about how we ask each other to make these changes.
Usually I'll say something like, hi, my name is Paige, what's your name? You know, and then we know we have a name for each other. And then if I get guys again, I say, oh, you forgot. I'm Paige.
Yeah.
To make it kind of.
Yeah, I think humor helps. Yep.
Yeah.
Humor does help.
I think it is really important to call it out when you do hear it, you know, and sometimes, you know, it is subconscious. I remember a few years ago, my partner pointed out to me that I had a habit in my personal life and professional life of referring to my other female friends or colleagues by their first name and my male friends or colleagues by their last name. And that I was giving a level of respect to my male friends or colleagues that I wasn't to the women in my life. And at first I was a little bit offended, like, no, of course I'm not doing that. And I sat back and kind of went down my list of the people in my life and realized she was absolutely right, that that's what I was doing, you know, straight down, evenly gender divided there. And you know, that was maybe about 5 years ago, and it took me maybe about a year to kind of push that out of my system. But I think it's mostly out now. So, you know, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to call it out, and you know, and recognize people when they try to change.
And to recognize when you can make a change, because we're all doing things that that might be contributing to this that we might not know about, and we have to be open to receiving that feedback if we're giving that feedback.
It's hard. It's scary to
Super
call
hard.
it out. It's real scary to call it out.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be called out too, so to model how to do that well and graciously and take the feedback and incorporate the feedback.
Okay, well, if no one has any more questions, I want to just thank the panel again. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.